We're in a situation in Australia which is, I think, a little bit hard to believe. We're in a situation where leading researchers in this country are writing letter after letter, trying to convince leaders in education that the way that we're doing things isn't consistent with research recommendations and is not achieving the best outcomes for our students. Australia's not doing that great in our literacy outcomes. So in 2011, we participated in the first international measure of literacy ability called the PEARLS study, Progress in International Reading Literacy. And out of 45 countries, we ranked 27th. We were the lowest out of all of the English-speaking nations, indicating that our Year 4s were not doing that well in their reading skills. So I think this is a pretty unacceptable outcome. And there's clearly a systemic failure going on. And unfortunately, what is going wrong to most people who are knowledgeable in this area is pretty obvious.
Sometimes it's hard to get people to take on board the message about reading instruction because it's characterised as a war between two different types of reading instruction. And sometimes for some reason that's painted as an ideological debate, as though, whole language is a left-wing thing and phonics is a right-wing thing. But to me, I don't see it as being a case of right versus left. It's right versus wrong. So there is one way of teaching reading that works better than the others, and that's based on the soundest research evidence that we have to date, and that research base is growing all the time.
The evidence is the research about what is required to effectively teach reading. We came through a period of a whole language approach where someone assumed that because the child learnt to talk naturally, that reading could be developed the same way. The science or the research tells us that the brain, while it might be hardwired for learning to talk, it's not hardwired for learning to read. Children actually have to be taught how the code works. To go from speech to print is not a simple process, but we do know what it is that we need to do.
We need to be experts in the language ourselves. We need to understand, have a very deep understanding of how the language works in order to be able to teach it effectively. And then, above all, we need to be very cognizant of the research in the area, and we need to close that research to practice gap, if you like, that void sort of in the middle.
Yeah, you need the knowledge and you need the background, and you need all of the scientific data, and you need all of the educational theories, but you have to take that and you have to put it into one-on-one with children in a classroom every day of the year, on every aspect of the curriculum. You have to make it work.
In Australia, we have so many great researchers. In fact, we have access now to research from around the world. One of the greatest challenges for a teacher is that when they're in their classroom, they're not part, if you like, of that research. And unfortunately, some teachers will say, well, what did you use? And they will actually value the opinion of a colleague over what the research is actually saying. Research is the only defensible basis for making educational decisions. So we need to find a way to make research accessible for teachers.
A lot of teachers don't have the knowledge that they need in order to implement a really high quality reading program in the early years of school. And that's not because they're not well intentioned. They work very hard and they want to do the right thing, but just they're not being given those strategies in their teaching degrees. Even just in the amount of time that's dedicated to literacy in a primary school teaching degree is really very small, and you would think that if there is one thing that a primary teacher needs to be able to do, is to be able to teach children to read. And yet the priority is just not there in teacher education courses.
When I went to university, to be honest, being an early childhood graduate, I was predominantly taught about constructivist approach to learning. And that is basically when children sort of learn for themselves. So the teacher in that sense is a facilitator. We would create activities, and we would hope that the children would pick concepts up by discovering them themselves.
There's a lot of teachers where it doesn't matter what your knowledge is, They don't want to know about it. They trust in their university degree, which you should be able to do. But if any teacher's aware of the National Inquiry into the Teaching of Literacy, you soon find out that your own teacher preparation was not good enough.
I felt highly unprepared to teach things like reading, teach writing, numeracy effectively. And in fact, I put into the classroom, I created a constructivist approach in my classroom, and I was really disheartened because my children weren't experiencing success. Yeah, the strong kids were developing, but those kids in the middle and those weaker students were experiencing so much difficulty that I went out in search of something better.
It would appear that our current teacher education systems don't necessarily give teachers the knowledge they need about how to teach reading systematically and explicitly. Seems to be lacking, if you like, that evidence-based approach to the teaching of reading. So basically teachers come out not necessarily fully prepared to teach reading. I think Louisa Mate says teaching reading is rocket science. So if it's rocket science, then teachers need to be taught how to teach reading. They need to be taught how our language system operates. We can't wait for them to hit a school and then spend at least 2 years developing the deep pedagogical content knowledge that they need to teach reading.
There are a lot of children who are struggling with literacy in Australia. We know that. Every bit of data that we're collecting at the moment tells us that there are many, many children who are struggling to acquire strong literacy skills in reading, in spelling, and in writing. We know that 52% of the 15 to 19-year-olds across the community were identified in the ABS data as not having sufficient literacy skills to engage in a modern workplace.
They're an instructional casualty, that they have never been taught to read by a method which works for them. Perhaps they're a child who needed to be taught by an explicit instruction method, and in fact they have been taught by one of those whole language methods, what I call the glance and guess method.
Instructional casualties generally are students who simply have not had sufficient exposure to strategies in phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, phoneme-grapheme relationship knowledge.
And so the first 3 years of school are learning to read, but from that point on it's reading to learn. So if you haven't got those fundamental literacy skills by year 3, and then you start to encounter more and more complicated sorts of reading materials and language, then from that point on things become very, very difficult and the gap gets wider. So it's the Matthew effect. So children who are good readers quite early tend to read more because they enjoy reading, they're successful, and therefore their skills grow. And children who struggle with reading and never get the help that they need just plateau. So the gap gets bigger over time, and the longer you leave it, the harder it is to close it.
I think expectations in our country are too low for our kids. And there's been a lot of play-based learning. So going back 5-6 years ago in this school, for example, the kids spent a lot of time in the playground, and there wasn't a lot of explicit teaching going on in phonological awareness and phonics. And so we turned that around completely. We really just looked at what does all the evidence say about best practice teaching in early childhood. And the evidence is very clear. If you start young, you get the best results. Over 80% of kids who fall behind never catch up. So our intent was don't let them fall behind. We're in a situation in our country where we have pretty much ignored the recommendations of 3 major inquiries into the teaching of literacy. So there was an American national inquiry into the teaching of literacy called the National Reading Panel in the year 2000. In the year 2004, Australia conducted a national inquiry into the teaching of literacy, and then I think it was 2006 there was a Rose report, which was the UK national inquiry into the teaching of literacy. And those 3 inquiries summarised information from thousands of studies and from thousands of researchers, and they all came to very, very similar conclusions.
Yes, so I was part of the original group of academics that sent the letter to the government about why Australia wasn't implementing evidence-based literacy instruction, which led to the National Inquiry into the Teaching of Literacy. I was reflecting on this when I knew I was talking to you, because that was 2005. So I'm not brilliant at maths, but I made that nearly a decade ago.
This was an inquiry that followed an American inquiry at the same time. A British inquiry was started, and they all found the same thing, that if we're going to teach reading well to children, it needs to be explicit, it needs to be systematic, there needs to be a phonic base to it. However, that hasn't really been taken up in schools to the extent that was the intent of that particular report.
And here we are, nearly a decade later, and I don't feel as though things have changed very much. People will say they've changed. Some people say they've changed. And there are some fantastic schools out there. And I've worked with some fantastic teachers and speeches, but it seems to me very much it's local level success. It's very much bottom up. We still don't seem to see top down. We haven't seen fundamental change in teacher education institutions. We haven't seen fundamental change from government. I don't think there's been a government in power long enough with the ability to implement or to make sure these things are implemented. So it sits there, this fantastic report. It languishes in the back of people's cupboards. But I don't really think that its evidence-based recommendations have been fully implemented.
One of the great things that's come out of this research is that it's given us a really clear understanding of what children need in order to learn to read. And that's all children, not just children with dyslexia. And as I said earlier, we've got no reason to believe that the learning that children with dyslexia do is any different from the learning that children who don't suffer from dyslexia do. It's just that in the case of dyslexia, they might need it more intensively, or they may need to be identified earlier and focused on in a more targeted way. But what we've learned is that a basic systematic reading instruction that focuses on teaching children to sound words out, teaching them decoding, teaching them phonological and oral language skills, obviously building their ability to comprehend as well as their ability to actually decode the words, is something that absolutely all children will benefit from.
The interesting thing about reading is that even though reading's been around for quite a long time, the science of reading, whilst quite well developed, has got a long way to go. So the power of evidence-based thinking is that it can always keep up with science, because you apply the same methodology, the same steps, to constantly update your understanding of what the science is telling you, but the steps themselves don't change. Thus the science and the knowledge and the data will change, but you can always keep up with that.
Just keep learning, and look for evidence-based practice. Look for stuff that is backed up by evidence that are being published in peer-reviewed journals. Get a bit more science into teaching, not just anecdotal methods of teaching.
When a new treatment comes up, teachers and clinicians can just follow these steps and try and make the best evidence-based decision that they can. So sometimes that's possible because a number of controlled trials have been done, and that those controlled trials have been summarised in what we call a systematic review or a meta-analysis. Sometimes there's only one or two trials that haven't been summarised like that, but we teach people how to find those trials so they can look at the outcomes and make their own decision. But sometimes there isn't a meta-analysis or a systematic review. There's no individual studies. So we try and teach people how to use related studies to make a decision about a particular program. But sometimes there's not even that. And then what we try and teach people to do is make a call based on no evidence. That's a fine thing to, well, is it a fine thing to do? It's not really a fine thing to do. It's not something I would do, but if there is no evidence, just try and teach people to recognise that if they decide to try a treatment, even though there's no evidence in support of it, you've got to acknowledge to yourself that you're stabbing around in the dark.
Any approach to reading has got to start at the beginning, and that's going to be with spoken language, and then you're going to see it move through phonological awareness. Then you're going to see some phonics be introduced. The more time you spend at phonological awareness, the easier it is to introduce phonics. Then you need some fluency. Then at the same time you need a vocabulary program, because once you get the kids to sound out the words or to recognise the words, they need to be able to understand them. Then you're moving into the realm of comprehension, which of course is the goal of reading.
Explicit instruction is where it's the opposite to a constructivist approach where you pose a problem for a child and you try to get them to work it out for themselves. Explicit instruction means you provide the information and then you make sure that that information is understood, and then you encourage the child to use that information in some sort of problem solving.
Learning to read is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. We talk, we don't need to be taught how to speak. Speech is something we are programmed for as human beings. We are not programmed for reading. Reading has to piggyback onto the part of our brain that mediates spoken language. So we need to teach children how to do this thing. So if we need to teach it, we need to teach it well.
I obviously use explicit instruction when I'm teaching my children in core subject areas such as literacy and numeracy. And I do that because a lot of the concepts in those areas are quite abstract. So it's important that we don't leave it to chance that our children will discover for themselves these concepts.
Within an explicit instruction lesson, you would start off by introducing what the one thing that you were going to teach. And that's really challenging for teachers because they're often used to teaching lots of things or presenting a series of concepts. With explicit instruction, you teach one thing and you say up front, today we are going to be learning about whatever. And then you would say, so this is why we're learning about it. And then you would preview all the sub-skills required in order to do that particular skill. So in the realm of spelling, you're often looking at single sounds, phoneme segmentation, syllabification, short vowels, long vowels. You will need that knowledge in order to be able to do that. So you would spend time reviewing that with the children.
There's another way to make a long vowel sound. Something that goes at the end of a word. Maya. E. Magic Mr. E can turn a short vowel into a long vowel sound. That's what we're going to look at now. I began with a warm-up, and that's what I do every morning, where I take concepts that I've explicitly taught to the children throughout the year, and I go over them again to reinforce that knowledge, to move that knowledge from short to long-term memory so that the children remember it. Okay, there's nothing worse than you teaching them something and you never revise it again, and 3 weeks later you ask them about it and they've got no idea what you're talking about. So we constantly revise important prerequisite skills that I know they need to be successful at literacy.
So having sold the concept to them, you would then move into your I do component, which is where you're modelling the particular rule. You've broken it down into baby steps and you're gradually building up the skill level of the children. You're explaining it. Then you would say, okay, everybody together. We're going to practice this again and again and again.
What? Yeah? He made the at say A. Great for words like pony. Watch this. P-O-N-E. He jumped over and made the ot say O. But for some words, have a look at this. Funny. But what would happen if Y jumped over? What would this word say? Who can tell me what this word would say? Caleb? Phony, because the Y would turn the into a U. So all the words got together and said, hey, we've got to stop this Y. He's changing what all of our words say. They came up with an idea. In a word where there was a Y at the end and there was a short vowel, they would double the consonant, because we know that Y can only jump over how many consonants? One! So what they did, let me get my rubber, let's have a look at funny this time. Short vowel, so they protected the short vowel by doubling the consonant. That way, Y could not reach the vowel sound and it stayed funny. Then we practice it together. We practice what they're going to do together so they feel comfortable. They know exactly what they have to do. It also enables me to see who might be having difficulty learning the concept, and so that I can give them further support. It also helps those children develop their confidence, because they know when they go back to their table, they've had all that practice. They can do this by themselves. So let's get your phoneme fingers ready. Get them ready. Let's say the sounds in happy. That's the vowel sound. Is short or long? Short or long? Short. Do you need to protect a short vowel? Yes. So which one of those words would say happy? I need one of my constables to hop up and rub out the naughty word, the one that doesn't say happy. Come on, Lachlan. Do you know, Constable Lachlan, which one's the naughty word? Point to us for us. Is he right?
Yes.
Constable Lachlan, how do you know that's the naughty word?
Because E can jump over and make the A sound.
So what would that word say?
Happy.
You don't say I feel happy today. Rub him out and get rid of him. And then I will send them back to their desks for a very short time, just so I can confirm in my own mind that they indeed have grasped that concept. But that shouldn't be a surprise for me, because during the guided practice phase, I should be gleaning information from the children by checking for understanding. I can be saying thumbs up, thumbs down. I can be saying, okay, Billy, do you agree with what Sarah said over there? Is she right? Tell me. I will actually test children's understanding to make sure they've really got the concept, and I will have multiple examples in there. So when the kids go back to their desks, they feel very confident because they only have to do a few examples to show me. It's a very small part of the lesson compared to everything else that you do. So it's that step-by-step process throughout the term, throughout the year, that takes children to mastery.
As I am early childhood trained, I still use everything I know about early childhood, singing, dancing, play, stories, and I bring that in that, and I use it as well as a vehicle to drive the explicit instruction. And I think sometimes people are amazed when they come in because they have this idea of explicit instruction being all the kids are sitting at their table and it's rote learning. And then they come in and they see, hey, these children are having fun. They're having fun and they're learning. And the concepts that they are learning are amazing. They're working well above their year level and they're enjoying it and they're having fun and they're moving and they're singing. And it's all of that thing all of those lovely things that we know about early childhood, but I'm also explicitly teaching content at the same time.
O-N-E spells 1, 1, 1. O-N-E spells 1, 1, 1.
This number can be a little tricky, you see, so please remember O-N-N-E.
Oral language is fundamental to reading. We talk about a bridge between oracy and literacy. We talk about moving from the skills of having strengths in oral language to a literate language.
The other very important area is in aspects of oral language or general language skills, so spoken language skills and listening, comprehension, listening type language skills. And a whole lot of those skills form the kind of foundation, if you like, for the ability to acquire these later decoding skills and language comprehension skills required for reading comprehension.
Language is about the communication system that a particular language has. So expressive language is the output, so being able to use words, grammatical structures, vocabulary, and to express myself in a way that you're understanding me. The literacy side of that is writing or spelling. Then we've got the input side. That's the hearing, the listening, the processing, and the comprehending or understanding of what's being said to me, or you're now understanding me. And that is receptive language.
Certainly all the evidence suggests is that it's language skills and the understanding of the sounds of language that is most related to reading outcomes for children, more so than their visual skills, which for a long time people thought, well, reading's visual, but actually reading's very linguistic. It's very much a language skill.
Phonological awareness is the ability for children to break up sounds in the English language. Now, it is a prerequisite skill for being able to read, being able to write, being able to spell. So it's very important that teachers in the early childhood years don't dismiss phonological awareness, that they actually teach it explicitly and systematically. The word is back. Clap it out. Go.
Back.
Well done. The word is pack. Clap it out.
Pack.
Stop. Serena, what's the vowel sound in pack? Let's jump up and down and swap the at for all the other short vowels. Go.
Pack, peck, pick, pop, pack.
Well, phonological awareness is like an umbrella term. It basically means awareness of the sound structure of words. But words are kind of divided into smaller and smaller pieces. So a word can be divided into little words like cupboard. It can be divided into syllables like helicopter. It can be divided into something called the onset and the rhyme. So like clap would be cool and app. And then the smallest bits are phonemes.
You might have also seen me getting the children to look at syllables on the drum. That was another example of phonological awareness, because I wanted those children to be able to read and write long words, multisyllabic words. If a child can't break a word into its syllables, they're going to have difficulty spelling. Remember, a syllable is a beat in a word. Everyone, what's a syllable?
A syllable is a beat in a word.
So if my noun was starfish, I'd do this, wouldn't I? Starfish. 2. Okay, who's got a noun? Let's have a look. Have you got one, Levi?
Yes.
Up you come. Fantastic. How many syllables? 3. Everyone get your drum ready. Let's do motorbike together.
Motorbike.
Let's head, shoulders, knees, toes, motorbike. Motorbike. Motorbike.
Phonemic awareness, and this simply means understanding of the sound structure of language, understanding how words are composed of speech sounds, understanding how to break those words up into their separate speech sounds, and vice versa, understanding how to join separated speech sounds back together.
Phonemic awareness, then, is actually being aware that words consist of those very smallest units of sound, so that the word clap is k, all, a, p. Now, why is that important? Because when you want to map between sound and print, when you want to crack the code, as they say, you need to be aware first that words are made up of that very small unit of sounds.
Oi, ul.
Spoil.
Brilliant job. What I want you to do next, Harry, is I'll give you some other words and I want you to chop them up into sounds for me. Can you do that for me? Thanks, man. Ready? Here's your first one. Moat.
Oat.
Brilliant. Roach.
Oach.
Excellent.
So having the hoops out and getting those students to step out those words is a strong example of phonological awareness. It's a high order phonological awareness skill that we refer to as segmenting. Now, segmenting, or the ability to segment a word into individual phonemes, is a prerequisite skill for children to be able to write. Your word is happy. Can you step it out for me? Can you stand next to the vowel sound? What is it? Is a short or a long vowel sound? Short. Caleb, do you need to protect a short vowel?
Yes.
Girls and boys, do you need to protect a short vowel?
Yes.
Lachlan, how do you protect a short vowel?
With 2 doubles.
Double the consonant. Can you write happy?
Well, the other thing that we know, as well as phonological skills, the other thing that's a very big predictor of children's ability to learn to read is just simply their letter knowledge. So if you measure a child's letter knowledge at age 3 or 4, that's a really strong predictor of how well they'll go on to learn to read.
Well, phonics is the bridge, really, between spoken language and print. And phonics is essentially a code breaker. It's so that when a child encounters a word they've never seen before, or a word that they have not yet become really familiar with, they can see all the different parts of that word, sound it out, put it back together again, and be able to read that word successfully. It means that children don't have to learn off by heart every single word in the English language. They can 95% of the time work out what it is with phonics using their code breaking skills.
Letters are very abstract, strange things. They're weird squiggles that represent sounds in our language. So I'll show you this. I like to think of words as hamburgers. So when I see my kids for the first time in my practice, I often tell them that words are like hamburgers. And so we talk about the sounds or the phonemes on one bun. So this is the word spoon, and the sounds in the word spoon are so there are 4 of those sounds. Now down here we have the visual representations of the word. So we have the letters S-P-O-O-N.
E.
You did it like in key, isn't it?
E.
Yeah?
E.
That one was a different version of this one. The word was pie. So what's the sound?
I.
You did it. You need to form a connection between the sounds in the word, in this case oo, and the way that they're represented by letters. And we're not very good, I think, at teaching this middle level here, and we're also not very good at teaching that sound level. We are quite good at teaching letters. We focus on letters a lot in school. So often kids will come to school and they already know their alphabet, for example. But very few of them come to school knowing that this is a S and this is a N, etc.
In terms of phonics, though, which is the bit that most schools would get wrong, is they say they're teaching phonics, but they don't, because there is a specific way of teaching phonics that's more effective than others, and that is in a sequence. So sequential and systematic and explicit are the three things that a good phonics program will be. That ensures that children don't have any gaps in their knowledge, that there isn't that, what they call a Swiss cheese problem, that every child has mastered all those aspects along the way, that you don't assume that they just know something and then find out in year 3, which is quite often where things come up. Reading problems will sometimes not occur until halfway through primary school. That's when they become identified.
What we want our teachers to know is what a regular word is, one that follows the rules of phonology, what an irregular word is, one that doesn't. Where did they come from? Well, we have to delve a little bit into the history of the English language to find those out. And what is a high frequency word? Well, a word that occurs a lot. That could be a regular word. It could be an irregular word. But the teacher needs to have that knowledge if they're going to explain to their class how these words came about, let alone how we're going to tackle them for both reading and spelling.
There's words that we call regular words, and these are words that follow the letter sound rules. And these words, what you need to do in order to read regular words with the letter sound rules is you need to know the letters, and you also need to know how the letters correspond to sounds. So this would sound like a mostly, and this one would sound like k mostly. So you teach children the letters, you teach them the associations between those letters and the sounds. So you teach them how to decode those individual letters into the sounds, k, a, t, and you have to teach them that they have to blend those together so that it produces a word. So k, a, t, blended together, cat. A lot of words in our written language aren't regular, so they're what we call irregular, which means that those letters don't necessarily correspond to the sound that you'd expect it to. The example we always use is yacht. So if you were to read yacht using the letter sound phonological decoding phonics approach, you'd go y, a, k, h, t, and then you'd ask the kids to blend this bunch of sounds together and they get yak. So what you need to do is, as well as equipping them with phonics to allow them to decode the many regular words in our language, you also have to equip them with the ability to read a word as a whole by sight from memory, to deal with those words that don't work out when they apply their phonics. So they come up with yacked. They go, hang on a minute, that can't be right. So you have to teach them to read some words by sight, such as yacht. So that's the pairing of the whole written word with the whole spoken word, and that's what a lot of people refer to as sight words. So those are kind of, when it comes to reading words in English, those are the two skills that you need to equip children with. So phonics or phonological decoding, and at the same time, there's sight word reading, or reading whole words by sight.
Oh, there are rules. There are rules in words. And if you follow this rule, most of the time that will help you to write a word. So that was quite a big moment for me, because, as I said, I just knew how to write these words. But the fact that there are actually so many rules that we can follow to actually learn how to write a word. So, that was big.
Decoding symbol to sound, and the reverse, encoding sound to symbol. But just teaching skills in isolation doesn't guarantee that the child can then use those skills to decode. And this is where the teacher's knowledge of knowing digraphs, common long vowel sounds and spellings, and importantly, the structure that is beneath decoding, which counts on the 7 syllable types. So when a teacher is equipped to know how to take oral language to print, we certainly are minimising the difficulties as to why a lot of children struggle. That same teacher has the knowledge to understand that it is a code-based instruction that we are teaching these children.
That every syllable has a vowel. Why is that important? Because if you want to spell a word and you can isolate that vowel and you can identify whether it's a short vowel or a long vowel, that tells you something about how to spell that word. It helps you to make a choice whether you're going to use at or you're going to use a. The next thing you need to know is where does that digraph or two letters that go together to make one sound fall in a word. And so if you as a teacher have a high level of teacher knowledge, you'll be able to cue the kids by saying AY goes at the end of words, AI goes in the middle of words. And so you will build up children's understanding of positional frequency. AI says A in the middle of a word. And sometimes in the beginning, like aim, I'm going to aim at the target. And over here we have AY says A at the end of a word, like in sway. But by the time children have got a grounding in phonologies, they start to realise, oh my goodness, positional frequency. These letters occur in these particular parts of words, typically. Great knowledge for them in terms of spelling. Then you can start moving as children are older into morphology, which is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. Not, unhappy. It helps children not only to chunk words when they're reading, but to work out how to spell. Then you can get to something like syllable types. Syllable types is really sophisticated understanding of metalinguistics. So for example, if you think about the words even and ever, they're very similar, but they've got different compositions in terms of their syllable types. Ever versus even. It tells us something about the way the words are spelt, if you can know that there's an open syllable and a closed syllable.
So just teaching closed and open syllables is the prerequisite to going on to teaching multi-syllable words made up of open and closed syllables. I teach that to a child within 3 minutes. What do I get back in the next 3 minutes? An understanding of how to decode open and closed syllables. With an older child, I can take them now straight into 2-syllable words made up of an open and closed syllable. So as an example, if I teach them an open syllable where the vowel says its name, we look at the word do in a different light now. Not as a high frequency word saying do, but now we look at the vowel saying its name, saying O, and it actually becomes do. And I'm giving you this example because when I train teachers, they're going, where is Jodie going with this? This is not making sense to me right now. We need to put the brain into an understanding that we are talking about an open syllable that you hear in speech, which is do, o. Open syllable, the vowel can say its name. Now let's show our teachers why this information is so important. Let's introduce a closed syllable, nut, n-ut. The vowel is now short. Why is it short? The syllable is closed. We speak in syllables. Why am I teaching this? Because if I've got an older child who has no idea of what an open and closed syllable is, I also need to look after self-esteem. If I teach them do as an open syllable and nut as a closed syllable, I can put those two words together now and they have the skills now to go on and read do, nut.
Get ready, everyone, read the first syllable, go. Laptop. What word? Laptop. Good job. Now it's getting tricky. Are you ready? I'm going to put a tricky one up there. I want everyone's eyes looking and helping me out. But I've got a question for you. Have a look at this first syllable. It ends with a vowel. Therefore, is that a short or a long vowel sound, Tyler? Long. Well done. If the syllable ends with a vowel, it's long, isn't it? So is it or you? Or you? Get ready.
I know what shh.
Everyone having a go. Everyone having a go. Have a go. When my hand comes down, I want you to call out the word, so you should know it. Everyone have a go.
Automaticity is really important because that leads to fluency, which enables comprehension. So if you're still reading really slowly, by the time you get to the end of a paragraph, you've forgotten what was at the beginning. So fluency allows you to not focus on trying to work out what the words are, but to extract the meaning.
We know that children with dyslexia struggle, many of them, to attain fluency, but as yet, it's not quite clear how to promote the development of that fluency, and that's something that we're spending a lot of time doing research on at the moment. In a sense, the best evidence we have so far is teaching children those basic foundations and then just giving them lots and lots of practice. And children with dyslexia will need more practice than other children. It's through that repetition and practice that the fluency will emerge.
So ensuring that skills are mastered in isolation is a prerequisite to getting results in accuracy and fluency of connected text. So you would have noticed with Tegan today that we work on those isolated skills, but then what we like to do is get a real book in front of that child. Not a reader, we want a real book in front of that child. We don't want pictures, we don't want contextual guessing. We want to have an experience where the child is now showing us as their teacher that they are applying in real life the skills that we've taught them to go on and read that book. At times, you will notice with Tegan today that we will remind them that we really want to work on getting those decoding skills to match the rate of speech, because we don't want to be laboured in our fluency to then impede our ability to make meaning. So my role today was to ensure any word that she didn't know, that I gave her that word, because our end result is to comprehend what we've read. I tap on any word that I'm feeling that she's missed, and I'm there supporting her as much as I need to until we have that accuracy and that fluency. Over time, I may be able to pull that scaffolding off. When I feel that my student has been able to commit to her long-term memory, what we hope for in all students, a direct route of reading.
Thinking about how you teach vocabulary. I talk a lot about this. So when children learn words, they learn what words mean and they learn the sound code associated with words. So when a fantastic teacher is going to take the children on an excursion, they'll often do a pre-learning, a pre-excursion activity where they'll brainstorm all the words that the kids know and they'll draw pictures. While you're teaching them about those words and the meaning, listen to the children. Make sure they're saying those words correctly. Consider not correcting them in a punitive fashion, but helping the children to say all those words as accurately as they can. What you're doing then is strengthening that sound code that's associated with the word that's linked to the meaning. So this is all about building those foundations that will strengthen them ready for cracking the code, for mapping across to sounds and letters.
That some children come to school with a very rich vocabulary and others don't. And it's large because of the experiences that occur before formal schooling. So if we want to address that in all children, including those who are the most vulnerable, and the reason we need to do that is because we can get kids good at reading. The process of reading is not that difficult to teach. Once we get them to the point where they can decode words, then they won't necessarily understand the meaning of those words, so comprehension is lost. So from the get-go, we would be introducing words into children's vocabularies. That, however, is not going to be sufficient. We need to provide examples on a daily basis. We need to have the children repeat those words, use them in context, use them in their writing, require them to use them.
A noun is the name of a person, place or thing. Everyone, what's a noun?
A noun is the name of a person, place or thing.
As children get a little older, we can then start introducing what's called Tier 2 words, which are quite sophisticated words, just a little bit out of children's grasp, but they're not technical terms. A word like serendipity would be a great word for kids to understand if they were at a particular age level where that might be coming up in a book that they were going to read. So for children, we need to break it down into child-friendly language.
Here is a picture of a bout.
Oh.
What do you reckon a bout is?
Boxing fight, a fight?
Yeah, some sort of fight, right?
Yeah.
In my classroom, I do a word a week. So one week we might be looking at mad, and I would teach them synonyms for mad. I teach them idioms for mad, and I'm developing their vocabulary like that. And it is quite visible in the students' writing that they're really understanding the vocabulary and using it in context. I'll have children write a weekend recount, and I'll say to them, girls and boys, at the end I want you to tell me how you felt, but don't make sure that you use synonyms for the words that you want, so you're using really great words. And the children will naturally write, I felt ecstatic because I had a lovely weekend, or they'll use an idiom, I felt on top of the world because my dad took me for ice cream. And you're seeing this vocabulary used all the time. And you would have seen me just using it throughout the day. Girls and boys, say it in your livid voice, say it in your irate voice. And they know those words because they've linked it to existing knowledge.
Girls and boys, what are synonyms? Synonyms are two words. They look different, they sound different, but they mean the same thing. Listen to Mrs. Wardana. I'm going to say some synonyms for happy. I want to see if you can remember one. Ready? Happy, jolly, delighted, content, ecstatic, merry, joyful. Here's some idioms. Over the moon, on top of the world. Ready, Caleb? My hand's in the air. When I put it down, I want you all give me a synonym for happy. Are you ready? Have you got one? Go!
Ecstatic!
What was yours?
Ecstatic.
Put it in a sentence.
I am ecstatic.
Brilliant. Ecstatic tie. Have you got one? Over the moon. That's a great idiom. Have you got one?
People might distinguish between oral comprehension and reading comprehension. Fundamentally, they're both language comprehension, but in a different medium. So listening comprehension relies on the hearing and the processing and the auditory memory, and reading comprehension also relies on the decoding of the word. But the actual act of comprehending the language is basically the same.
It's actually about being able to understand the set of instructions that are in front of us, the historical description of something that took place a long time ago, to be able to understand the physics that's being described, to be mesmerised by an extraordinary story of courage. It's about understanding what we're reading. That is the point that we want to get to with all students, with everybody. We want children to be able to lie back, read effortlessly in their spare time and love it. So how do we get there? We get there by taking students through that systematic teaching of learning about the necessary skills, but alongside that we are always focusing on comprehension, but at an oral language level initially. So it is about understanding what is the story about, talking about some of the really important messages that came through, even 4 and 5 year olds talking about the very hungry caterpillar and where does he end up and what happens to this very hungry caterpillar. All of that fabulous oral language is about building those early comprehension skills.
But to teach kids to make meaning from text is the end game. It's not the act of reading itself. What we don't want is large numbers of kids who can read fluently but they're not making meaning from the text. So we're focusing really strongly on literal comprehension and also inferential and evaluative comprehension, and that's difficult to teach. So we focus strongly on strategies that work to do that. We do a lot of work on self-talk with the kids, so our teachers are modelling that to the students, so how you talk your way through a text to make meaning from it.
So what steps can you use to find the main idea of a paragraph? Okay, so you're thinking of a paragraph. What steps can you use? What's the first thing that you can do, Dylan?
You look in the first sentence and last sentence.
Excellent. So I look in the first sentence and the last sentence. What if it's not in the first sentence and the last sentence? Then what am I going to do, Josh?
You're going to look in the title or think about it.
Okay, is there a title in a paragraph?
Oh, no.
Okay, so what am I going to do?
You're going to make an inference.
I'm going to make an inference, so I'm going to
think about it.
Think about it. Excellent. And then what do I need to do to state that main idea? I put it in my
own words.
Excellent.
Reading comprehension is very complicated. It requires neurologically the capacity to use executive functioning, because you're planning, you're predicting, you're reviewing all of the time with reading comprehension.
Obviously, when you read, it's important to make those predictions and then to think about whether your predictions changed after you've read sections and how they might change again before you read the next section. That's part of what good readers do.
Be using prior knowledge, their own knowledge, looking for clues in the text, doing comparisons, And it would look like the teacher in front of the classroom walking through the text and reading a paragraph to the children and saying, so I'm looking for a word here that might give me a clue about what this character might be thinking, or I'm looking for a phrase that might give me a clue about what this character's thinking. I'm using my past knowledge and I'm looking at the look on his face, and that's telling me that he's not happy about this or she's not happy about this. So it's about getting kids to delve deeper into the text, not just look at what does the text say.
Another component of reading comprehension that is very important is syntax. So when we talk about grammar, we're talking actually about two components. We're talking about syntax, which is the rules of sentence structure for a particular language, and we're talking about morphology, which is the rules of word structure for a particular language. Students who have good knowledge of English syntax, so they understand how we pack a sentence together, what the links are between components of a sentence, what the rules are around forming sentences, tend to have better comprehension.
That's right. It comes, you know the word foundation? If you build a house with a foundation. So if you're a founder of something.
So you're kind of like the structure.
Yes, you're like the structure. You're the person who started the whole thing up, right?
Yeah.
So it was founded on
March 3, 1915.
The morphology, we know that students who are morphologically aware, in other words, they understand how words pack together, particularly all of the Latin and Greek that children are exposed to from about year 4 on. So by about year 5, 6, around about 70% of the words that they're coming across in text are going to be Latin or Greek. This means if you have a bit of an understanding of the structure of Latin words, prefix, base, suffix, and you have an understanding of how Greek words are formed, nice Greek combining forms, then you start understanding a lot more about the words that you're coming up against in text. You understand the words better, you understand the passage better.
Being prepared to look outside of the usual information channels and to be quite critical of the school's practices and prepared to do things very differently than the way they've been done in the past. Not to let offending people or the sensitivities of offending teachers and the way they do things stop change from occurring, because in the end it's the children whose interests should be at the heart of what a school is doing.
Not accept that kids just can't learn. Not accept that they're just behind. An absolute belief that all children can learn and all children can be, can be good readers, can be good writers, no matter what.
The faculties of teacher education, they're a very big, heavy ship, and it has to turn by degrees. It takes a long time because there are lots of people who are very invested in their own way of teaching reading, and it's difficult to change their perceptions and their ways of doing things. So what has tended to happen is that policy has changed.
If they haven't got the teaching practice right, it's like having a ship with holes in it. You're trying to plug all these holes, and intervention won't work, because you've got too many kids who need intervention. You can't have 30% of your kids at the end of grade 1 failing on all international standards. That's what's happening in this country. And what we need to do is make sure at the end of year 1, there aren't any kids failing. And then those kids that need some extra support, it's only a couple of them, and we can put supports in place to help them. But generally, if you get the teaching right, highly effective teaching strategies, then across the board, the kids can achieve what we're trying to present to them.
Teachers are the people that actually make the real difference, despite home background, socioeconomic status, prior experience from the child. If they are in front of a teacher who knows how the language system works, a teacher who knows how to teach systematically and explicitly, knows how to teach the big 6 of reading, then that child will experience success. I
have lots of schools that come to our school and visit us, and when they see what we do, I've had lots of questions about our school wouldn't spend the money on that. Well, my response to that would be, if you're not spending your money on improving your teaching, if you're not spending your money on getting better results for your kids, what are you spending it on? And it's about priorities. And I think when you form an absolute belief that you can do better for all kids, I'm not saying we work harder, I'm just saying we can do it better. If you form that belief, then that's where your finances have to go into.
So if you're a teacher and you're thinking, gosh, I don't know about positional frequency, I don't know about certain spelling rules, You can go online, you can pick up books. There are now great resources there that will support you in the teaching of phonological awareness, in the teaching of spelling, in the teaching of writing. I think the biggest step for a teacher is to say, okay, I'm going to admit something. If the kids aren't learning, it's actually my fault. I'm the teacher. It's not their fault. And unfortunately, a lot of kids take a lot of blame for poor teaching.